This is Matthew Kenslow. In this video, I am answering a question that I got from one of my very good friends, Dylan, and he was asking me to explain a little bit about Asperger's syndrome, what it is, so that he and other people could understand more about it. So I am Matthew Kenslow, the royalty published author to the award-winning book Juggling the Issues Living with Asperger's Syndrome, and in it I talk about my first-hand experience on living with Asperger's. So this is my comprehensive, not everything, but my comprehensive definition of Asperger's and my personal stories. I want to preface this video first by saying that Asperger's syndrome is no longer diagnosis. I was diagnosed circa 2001 when they were using the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, I believe it is, or DSM. And back in the day, they were using the 4th edition, in which is the diagnosis Asperger's syndrome. And in 2013, the 5th edition, DSM-5, came out, where Asperger's is no longer a diagnosis. So no one could be diagnosed today with Asperger's, but I have the diagnosis, and colloquially, quote unquote, I have Asperger's syndrome. And Asperger's syndrome was defined as a mild form of autism. But this is my personal explanation to Asperger's. I described it in this book, in the preface, as an enhancer. Asperger's is like an enhancer plugged into the brain, enhancing our perceptions of things in life. And so people with Asperger's are usually perseverant in their studies, in their skills. For instance, I'm a piano player and a juggler because I just started one day and I just never stopped teaching myself. I learned the basics in a class for keyboard, but then I taught myself everything else, and juggling was all self-taught. And that's because we're driven and motivated to accomplish things. We tend to hate it when we don't finish things. So if I'm up late, like 11, 12 o'clock at night, and I'm working on something, it's like I just cannot go to bed until I've finished it. And some projects, like writing a book, takes months or years to do. A lot of things may be easy for a lot of people, but difficult for us. Sometimes it's because we could overthink things, or sometimes it's that we just don't understand simple instructions. But on the other side, it's easy for us to do the hard things when it's hard for everyone else. It's easy for us to do. And I found that out throughout my life, and that's kind of an odd situation there. For instance, when I was in school, growing up, K through 12 and college, it seemed like a lot of my classmates understood everything that the teacher was telling us, but some of us on the spectrum, it was hard for us to understand. We had to get help from our neighbors and such, but some things were easy, like math and history. For me personally, if you've been following me, if you know me, if you've read my book, then you may know that I could do calculations in my head. I know a lot about the presidents of the United States because it's easy for me to remember things. I find patterns of things. You could give me a number between 1 and currently 46, and I could tell you the president, their birth date, death date, term dates, political party, native state, and such, all while juggling if you want, but it's just easy for me to find patterns in things. I've memorized the elements of the periodic table, and those are some of the things that I could do. And other people have their sets of skills and memorization skills and such. It just depends on what interests them. So one of the number one rules to keep in mind is if you meet one person with Asperger's or autism or any other disability, then you haven't met everybody. Autism is a spectrum, and some people defined it as a polar spectrum where you have two extremes, but nowadays people tend to look at a circular spectrum. You could look those up if you want. They're pretty neat. And so people could fall anywhere in this circle instead of it being linear and such. Asperger's syndrome was a mild form of autism, so I was able to be mainstreamed in regular school, but there's some people with a less mild form who have to be more in a special day class. There are some people with autism who cannot speak. They're mute. That doesn't mean that they should be stopped from living, because I actually know a person, Jack Berry, I follow a person, but he's in the UK, and he just published a book this year about his drawings, and it talks about autism, and he was 14 at the time. On March 20th, I made a video recommending his book. Having Asperger's syndrome, I find that I share some of the common characteristics, like sensory overload sometimes, with sounds, feelings, sight, smells, taste, and such, but maybe not as extreme as other people in the autistic spectrum. For instance, there are some people who need to undergo stimming in public. Now, stimming is like repetitive noises, repetitive rocking, some spinning circles or flap their hands when there's just a lot of sensory overload in the environment. I personally don't do that, but what I found is that I talk with my hands, and in some of my videos you see me using my hands a lot, and last year I made a video about that. Now, sometimes our brain needs to unload sometimes, and I can relate to this. For some people, when they're out in public, there's a lot of sensory overload going on, and sometimes they have a meltdown and such. And although I haven't had a meltdown, I've had experiences where I had to go home and just be by myself. I mean, I just did not want anyone else around. I just had to process things in my mind. No offense to anybody, but I have to process things in my mind, and usually that happens after someone really treated me horribly, usually, and other things. But there are times when we just have to just get away from people momentarily, like go to our room and just think things out. Another thing is that we could be easily distracted. Sirens always distracted me, or aircraft, helicopters, planes and such, like when I was in class and such. And ironically, I'm a fire buffer and a plane spotter today. It's easy for our affective filter, quote unquote, to rise. Affective filter means, well, the more they have it, the more panicked you could be over the littlest things. Like sometimes we want to make sure that everything is right, or that we have everything correct in our head before we present something. And sometimes we want to rehearse and rehearse and rehearse so that we're not up in front of people stuttering. I personally love speaking and also making videos, but I have to rehearse it out because there's sometimes when I know something, and then, like, let's say in class or someone asks me a question, it's like I know it, all of a sudden I forget it, and it's hard to explain. Another thing is we could be very fixated on things. We are typically known to be over obsessed with games, and I could testify to that. Super Monkey Ball Jr., Donkey Kong Country Trilogy, parts 1, 2, and 3 on Game Boy Advance. When I was a child, I was fixated on those games. I played it until I won everything in that game, even though it took a long time. Another thing is that we tend to over dramatize things. Well, not really that, but overthink things, and sometimes we could get easily disturbed over laughable things. My last chapter or short story in the book, chapter 29, is The Laughter of Slapstick Comedy. Oh wait, that's why I titled it. And it's because some people laugh at slapstick comedy where, you know, like Tom and Jerry or the Three Stooges or what they have nowadays, which are even more dramatic than what they had back in the 30s and the 40s. And sometimes we could get overly disturbed on the littlest of things, and sometimes we could get very sad or very overly concerned over the littlest things. So many hypotheticals. I have so many examples in chapter 29 if you're interested for more details, but that's just something more about us. A lot of us that people with Asperger's have, and autism in general, is a speech impediment, and that was one of the first things that I was tested for when I was 3, and I was subsequently diagnosed with a speech delay. So all throughout elementary school I had speech class that I went to. If you watch some of my home videos, you could tell that I didn't always speak like I am now. I've been doing a lot of practice throughout my young life, so that I'm not speaking impeccably, obviously, but it's much better than when I was younger. And again, my home videos, some of them could show that, how I talked back when I was 4 and 5. But I'll tell you this, people who have Asperger's syndrome, who has a mild form of autism spectrum disorder, some people may not be able to tell that they are autistic. I've gotten a lot of comments, mostly at Orange Coast College when I was there, and probably high school and such, but there's people who actually do not see me as disabled, quote unquote. There's people who do not see me as needing special accommodations. And I have lots of friends who have had the diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome, and I could see them fitting right in. And you know, if I didn't know them, I wouldn't think that they had Asperger's too. But inside, they're sort of juggling the same issues that I'm juggling with. In fact, that's what this book's about, juggling the issues of living with Asperger's syndrome, where each chapter or short story talks about either a catharsis or an aspect of Asperger's in more detail. For instance, some of the things we struggle with besides, eye contact, conversational skills, other things are social skills. In fact, the largest short story in here, the largest chapter, is about shyness and social interactions. That's one of the most common things, and that could be good for a video for another day. And of course, I have an entire playlist, so if this video doesn't tell everything and you want to hear more of me speaking, then I invite you, if you want to my Autism Awareness and Acceptance playlist. I talk about soliloquies and what I mean by that. I talk about some of the stories that I've endured throughout my life socially. A lot of people who just don't accept us for who we are in the neighborhood, which still happens to this day, but I'm fighting, or I'm doing my part in the fight of having everyone universally accept us and all other disabilities for who we are. What I have told publicly for years and years and benefits and such is that we're not really different than anybody else. It's just how our mind works. There are pros and cons. For instance, there's some things that we are good in, we excel in, but simple things, it could be tough. Social interactions, it could be very tough. We could be very, very shy. We could be fixed on one thing, even if it's all night long or all day long. And a lot of us are really trying to just do a good job and just contribute to society. Again, because if you meet one person with autism, you haven't met everybody, and there are some things that I say that not everyone would agree with, because let's say they have autism too and they come to me and say, well, I could relate to this but not this. I mean, I love to socialize, it's easy for me. Okay, not everyone has the same exact set of symptoms or issues to juggle with, but I'm personally saying that I want to do the best I can for other people. And I think a lot of us have the same heart and mind. I really like this cover because it exemplifies what it's like living with Asperger's syndrome, trying to do the best you can. And the artist did this, and it wasn't my first choice. I'm like, what was I thinking? I'm glad this is the choice. But you have a guy here juggling while balancing at the same exact time. So that's my brief summary of Asperger's syndrome. I really, 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 really hope that I helped everyone in understanding how we live. If you have any questions, please ask in the comments. I want to do my part. Again, there's much more detail in this book. There's much more detail in my YouTube playlist that I referenced to earlier. If you can't find an aspect in one of my videos, please let me know and I will try and comment on it. I invite you to look up other people, the Aspie World, for example, Special Books by Special Kids, Maybe Autism is My Superpower by Ben Blanchett, another autistic who's an author over in New York, and many more. Now I want to conclude this video by quoting a comment that I got from Dylan, the person who asked if I could make this video, and he was encouraging me in a comment and said that he views autism or Asperger's not as a disability but a different ability, and I absolutely love that. So thank you, Dylan. And for everyone else, again, I'm willing to answer any questions that you have. If you have Asperger's, if you have autism, if you have any other disability, physical or developmental, please do not let that slow you down. Yes, we are given labels, but the labels should not define us. What I recommend is you talking to the person and finding out what are they comfortable with. Are they comfortable by the way that you're treating them, or do they prefer that you treat them a different way? So get to know the person, and just know that you were created for a purpose and that you're on this earth for a purpose. You have a purpose, you have a calling in this life, and I just can't say this enough, but never give up on your passions and what you want to do. So I'm Matthew Genslow. Have an excellent day.